Hello, everyone. Welcome to Chapter 2, Being Aware of Self and Others. This chapter is going to require you to go ahead and click on the actual PowerPoint itself when we start talking about Google, because there's a video that I want to show that I think is indicative and representative of some of the stuff that we'll talk about today. So let's hop into this idea of, last time we talked about the idea of being a leader and how it is that we use leadership in an effective way within Chapter 1. This time we're thinking about the awareness of self and others and how it is that we can use this in a positive way. So the first idea that we'll talk about today is this notion of mindfulness, that we are aware, we are cognizant of our own thoughts, actions, and motivations, what it is that motivates us and how we get inspired to do great work. Ultimately, when it comes to being a mindful leader, we think about the assumptions about our followers. What do we think about our followers? What do we think about the organizational culture in place? Is it what we want? Is it something that we can theoretically change in a leadership role? And are we aware in any way of ethical issues? Are there problems within the workplace that stem from maybe mismanagement of employees, perhaps higher issues like malpractice or other issues surrounding that? But also, how is it that we can sort of avoid some of these ethical issues? And ultimately it boils down to being mindful, trying to be a mindful leader and thinking about how it is that we can make a meaningful impact on the different motivations that we have within these individuals. When we talk about mindfulness, we also have to think about the social styles, being aware of the social styles that we have. And we really break this down into two categories, and I think we may be even able to extend a little bit further. The first category is this idea of assertiveness. And don't get confused between assertiveness and aggressiveness, although there are a little bit of similarities. Assertiveness is being able to speak your mind, being able to take a step forward and really put yourself in a position to succeed. And responsiveness, or as we will also use a term like cooperativeness interchangeably, responsiveness is being able to take the feedback, take the criticism, and use something more efficient when we're talking about delivering on promises to our employees and other people as well. So when we break this down in a bigger piece, we fall into these four major categories that we talk about, from amiable to analytical, driver, and expressive, and we can even do an activity to figure out where it is we fall into this. But just know that, again, we might have multiple social styles, although in most cases there is a dominant social style that is present. When we talk about this idea of amiable, we are individuals who, as we classify as relational specialists, we are able to help and find supportive roles within the workplace versus someone who is more analytical or technical. Ultimately, we're starting to see a pretty big divide when it comes to the workplace, where we have positions hired for analytics managers versus positions hired for HR. But it also has to do with a topic of being a driver, someone who is focused on the control, an individual who enjoys working within the leadership and management positions. And control, again, might be negatively skewed. So we think about control as being able to help dictate, help to tell individuals where to go and how to get there. But similar to the relationship specialist, an expressive social style is very social. We're enjoying being in the presence of others. We're able to help individuals out. So think about the way that you as an individual function. Think about the roles and the aspirations that you have. How is it that we get there? And what is it that we need to self-identify? We even have popular press like StrengthsFinder as ways to make sense of all of this. And here we are, if you wanted to actually calculate what your score is for all of these characteristics to figure out your social style, you can go ahead and click the PowerPoint here and measure it yourself. The assertiveness and responsiveness or cooperativeness are good indications and maybe a good place for you as an individual to start moving forward. And ultimately, this is sort of where you will plot yourself, a little bit of math involved, but where you'll plot yourself when it comes to where I am as an individual and how it is that we are maybe more or less assertive or more or less responsive. And we are somewhere within these four quadrants overall. Now, not only could we theoretically have multiple social styles, but we can adapt our social style given the situation. And we think about this as a term of style flexing, that we adapt our communication dependent on how others are communicating. So when a driver and a driver meet, two individuals that want control, want authority, want to be able to make decisions for the group, there might be some conflict. So how is it that we flex our styles, and how is it that we move forward and choose our communication in a more effective way? Now, more important than just style flexing, we're thinking about the motivations, the motives that we have for continuing awesome work. And this is something that when we're talking about how it is that we motivate other people, we go to a variety of different approaches of communication. The first one being this classical approach. And the classical approach is something that we've been using. You can think about factory workers. We've been using the classical approach for quite some time now. You're probably more familiar with this if you've taken an ORGC class. But the classical approach is really grounded in this idea of rewards and punishment. That when you do something well, you get a reward. When you do something not so well, you get punished, you get terminated. End of discussion. And ultimately, when it comes down to the tasks that are being facilitated, the tasks that are being attempted here, there's really only one best way, and that's usually the best way that the management or whoever the senior is talks about this. Leadership is usually one singular leader who has all the roles and the titles and the responsibilities. They're probably an individual who, within the organizational hierarchy, is at the very top, and their message sort of trickles down to the manager, and that manager's manager, and so on and so forth. And as individual members of this team, we're not expected to collaborate necessarily, but just sort of show up and do work. But as you think about the classical approach, we also have some limitations within it that ultimately it's not very conducive to the success of these different individuals. Team members in general want to be able to collaborate. They want to feel as though when they make a mistake, they're not being punished for it, although the reward part is nice. So when we move forward with this, we sort of jump forward in time, not just the factory worker approach within the classical management approach, but we think about the human relations approach. And so we see this evolution over time that maybe we shouldn't always penalize people for trying to make a mistake. And we think about humans, we have this huge dawning idea that maybe humans are motivated individually. Maybe they have something internal for working hard or not working hard. Maybe just showing up every day isn't enough to keep me excited about my job, to keep me enthusiastic. We started to do a study in the 1930s, what we refer to as the Hawthorne effect now. And essentially what happened was individuals were being watched in the workplace, and we noticed that when people are treated as individuals, when we are observing them, they start to work and interact with each other differently. And ultimately, the work that they do is contingent on the working conditions. So if you're in, from a very basic level, we talk about hygiene factors, there are basic aspects of a job that might be present for satisfaction. We think about when we go into a bathroom at a fast food restaurant or any other restaurant, we see basic hygiene messages, please wash your hands. You have to remember that not all places outside of this sort of first world that we live in, this Western world, have these hygiene factors. This seems like a no-brainer for us, but again, we decided that over time we needed to have some sort of sanitation to make sure that these individuals felt safe at work, that they weren't contracting illnesses and dying off. But not only that, we need to figure out what motivates these people. What is it that, as an individual, as a worker, can I tap into and make sure that you want to work harder? And this is something that we have a huge number of assessments, and we're spending millions, if not billions of dollars each year in research and development. But ultimately, it boils down to each individual is different. What motivates me as your professor might be different than what motivates you as a student. I enjoy talking about this information. I find it really fascinating, and I find it helpful for my understanding of the world. You might find it boring. How is it that we tap into the part that makes you interested in these topics? We start to, and this is the video that I want you to go ahead and click if you're able to. It's about a 4-minute video talking about Google. But we go from this idea of human relations to human resources, giving our people the benefit of the doubt, providing them with paid time off, family insurance, 401k matching, things that on a basic level might be commonplace. Other people, other places might not have this. So go ahead, watch this video, let me know what you think. But we also have this idea that when we're talking about human relations, we're thinking about the resources, right? Each individual not only brings a specific skill set, but they also are able to provide value, provide resources. We as leaders are able to empower them to participate. And ultimately, when we talked last time about being laissez-faire, This time we're talking about sort of giving people the opportunity to take control, to take ownership over their work. We're letting leaders in a lot of ways work side by side with their teams. Recently, I think within the past couple of months, I saw a video of Mark Zuckerberg giving the Facebook tour. And as he's walking through, he says, this is one of the divisions that we have research and development, and then here's where we have some of the conference calls. And then casually he goes, and here's my desk. And his desk was quite literally in the middle of the room with a bunch of other people's desks. And to think that the CEO of this billion-dollar company is, along with his peers, sends you a message. It tells us that we value collaboration. We value everyone being on that same level playing field. And it not only emphasizes the task itself, because people at Facebook certainly work hard, Google as well, but also emphasizes the person. So I value you because you do awesome work. But I also value you because you're really good at ping pong and it's really fun to have you around. So again, we're seeing a shift. Classical approach, we only cared about the task. If you're in a factory and you got hurt on the job, you can't perform your task, that sucks. You're replaced. Human relations, we start to focus more on the individuals, although the task is still very important. Human resources, we're focused on both. How is it that both of these impact the way that we motivate and we inspire people to do awesome work within the workplace? But I want to know what you think, and this might be an opportunity for you within your writing prompts to discuss it. But which type of motivational leadership are you most comfortable with as an employee? So you could be sort of recalling you as an individual, your previous jobs, or maybe your current job, or even a job in the future. What type of leadership are you comfortable with as an employee? And on the flip side of that, what type of motivational leadership would you be most comfortable with as a leader? So you have to think about, how is it that you as an individual are motivated, and does that impact the way that you motivate other people? And if it does, that's great, because it's the first step of many to make sense of this world. More importantly, when we talk about this, we're talking about being aware of other people's motivations and being able to tap into that, but also being aware of organizational culture. How is it that our culture impacts the way that we communicate, and how is it that we communicate impacts our culture? We see this sort of cyclical relationship here. So we think about the nature, the basic nature of organizational culture, and we learn that there are different patterns of beliefs, values, assumptions, rules, the whole shebang about how the organization communicates and how it is that people buy into the system or not. It ultimately affects all aspects of how work is done. Are we focused on the person, or are we focused on the task? And it inherently impacts the way that we communicate with each other. So again, let's think back to some places that maybe we've worked before, or we currently work. How is it that we stop and communicate? How is it that we use our skills in a way to communicate our culture? Do we have sort of pictures all over the place? Do we have these motivational posters, say success, accomplishment, drive? Or do we simply talk about it openly? And again, this is something to think about, similar to how is it that you would be a leader, how is it that we as individuals want to communicate about our culture? And it's not that simple. There is no one correct response in regard to all of this. But not only is it the nature that we have, but we think about how it is that we create culture. And the first step is really how it is that we communicate. Thinking about the impersonal communication. Do we as individuals communicate effectively with each other? Do we use communication explicitly versus implicitly? So are we very direct, or do we have some sort of subtle nuances when we're talking about this? But it also includes the different layers and the realization that, times change. Your business, the industry that you're in, certainly changes over time. And so how is it that we, as individuals react to this? How is it that we not only communicate when things are going well, but if we have success in a way that we're realizing that there are changes that are being made? So in addition to this, we think about the way that organizational culture and leadership sort of blend together. We see this sort of intersection of the two. And we think about when leaders are communicating about organizational culture, they're not only communicating it as sort of this person in front of a podium and they have a microphone like I do here, and they're talking about it, but we're also thinking about it in terms of, what is the leader paying attention to? How do they react in major events and crises? What do they do as role models? Okay, so we think about the idea of being a role model. How do I reward you for your behavior? More importantly, How do I recruit? How do I promote? How do I act as the staple, the cornerstone of our company? I'm a leader. I need to be able to articulate our company culture in 3 words, in 5 words, in 7 words, in 30 seconds. Think about the way that you communicate about yourself. Imagine an elevator pitch. Do we have that in the same way within the leadership and the organization itself? And if not, what do we do to sort of empower that? Ultimately, we are faced with not so fun decisions. These ethical leadership challenges that we find ourselves in might not be beneficial, and they might be challenging. And ultimately, when we talk about ethics, we're talking about the beliefs, the values, the moral principles, what's right and what's wrong. And this comes down to 2 distinct areas. Me as an individual, I have a sense, right? I have an idea as to what I think is right and wrong. But me as a leader, me as someone who is employed by DePaul University, I think about what is it that I am trying to promote as an individual? And what does it mean to be ethical? And more importantly, when I'm unethical, when I'm going against the values, the beliefs of my organization, what do I do then? Am I grounds for being fired? How is it that I communicate with this moving forward? But ultimately, we think about the challenges that we have of deceit, that some leaders have to manage temptation to deceive others. What challenges might those look like? That might be a good opportunity for you to write within your writing prompt. I think about the challenges of deceit. It is very easy for us to lie to our stakeholders. It's very easy to lie and say, in 5 months, we're going to give you a promotion, and just buy yourself 5 months for someone to wait. But as a leader, you have an obligation. You are sort of ethically inclined to be open, to communicate effectively with the different people within your organization. And unfortunately, that comes at a price. It's exhausting to think about leadership and talk about how it is that we communicate effectively. But, sometimes that's par for the course. That's what we need to do. We also have challenges of responsibility. We are responsible for our behaviors. We're responsible for the behaviors of other people, the team members. We think about public relations and the media. There are a lot of situations where we are challenged to stand up for someone who might be in a sex scandal. A very extreme example, so I apologize for that. We think about the responsibilities that we have and how it's challenging not only to maybe use deceit as a tool, but also the responsibility we have. And finally, this idea of challenge of consistency. We have to come in and day out and put our best foot forward. We have to mask the negative emotions. We can't be deceitful. We have to be ethical, and we have to be consistent. On a very basic level, leaders must acknowledge that we have personal differences. I am not always going to be a bundle of joy, a ray of sunshine. Sometimes I'm going to have a bad day. Unfortunately, leaders are scrutinized for this, and this is one of the opportunities that we have to take a couple steps back and go, maybe my consistency has to come from my individuals and the relationships that I've built with these people. I'm having a bad day. I really need you to step up, Jeff. I need that. And when we have that established relationship and we have that understanding, it makes it easier to be consistent in the workplace. But ultimately, that's just some of the ideas when it comes to the very basic understanding of being aware and cognizant of not only each other, but ourselves. How is it that we have success moving forward as an organization? And what is my role as a leader, maybe an aspiring leader, to help contribute to that? Ultimately, we find ourselves in sort of hard places sometimes. It's easy. There's a lot of temptation to be unethical, to use deceit as a tool. But should we? Is that appropriate? I'll let you decide.